This episode of GovLove is brought to you by the Fels Institute of Government at the University of Pennsylvania. Are you looking to develop your leadership skills and drive change in the issues you are passionate about? The Fels Institute of Government Master of Public Administration programs at the University of Pennsylvania can get you there with innovative coursework taught by recognized experts and practitioners. Learn about their courses, experiential learning opportunities, and extensive alumni network by visiting www.fels.upenn.edu. That's www.fels.upenn.edu.
Coming to you from the ICMA Conference in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, this is GovLove, a podcast about local government, brought to you by Engaging Local Government Leaders. I'm Meredith Reynolds, Deputy City Manager of Long Beach, California, and GovLove co-host. We have a great episode for you today. We're talking with Erin Dalton, Director of Allegheny County Department of Human Services, and Mariana Escallón Barrios is an Assistant Teaching Professor of Information Systems at Carnegie Mellon University. We're going to be talking about partnering for a data-informed operation. But first, the best way to support GovLove is to become an ELGL member. ELGL is a professional association engaging the brightest minds in local government. Check us out and learn more about membership at elgl.org. Now let me introduce today's guests. Erin Dalton is the Director of Allegheny County Department of Human Services, which works to strengthen families and communities through a network of social services, care, and support. DHS serves over 200,000 people each year through its community-based programs that prevent harm and address needs for family support and child development, developmental supports, senior services, housing, and protection from maltreatment. Erin previously directed DHS's analytics, planning, and information technology functions and was recognized for her achievements in integrated data and analytics and unique information sharing partnerships she built. Prior to joining DHS, Erin worked for the Violence Prevention Initiative, One Vision, One Life, and the U.S. Department of Justice. Erin earned a master's degree of science in public policy and management from Carnegie Mellon University's Heinz College and is an alumna of the Coro Center for Civic Leadership program. Mariana Escallón Barrios is an assistant teaching professor of information systems at Carnegie Mellon University. Here, Mariana teaches in the area of statistics and data analysis to support decision-making and also teaches a course to undergraduate students through the PPIA Junior Summer Institute Fellowship on data analytics for social good. She's an active member of the Institute for Operations Research and Management Sciences, and prior to joining Carnegie Mellon University, she earned her PhD in Industrial Engineering and Management Sciences from Northwestern University, where she worked on modeling and solution approaches for logistic problems in nonprofit settings. As a graduate student, she received the Outstanding Teaching Assistant Award in 2020 and was the chair of the McCormick Graduate Teaching Committee. Love to welcome both Erin and Mariana to our podcast today. Thank you both for joining me.
Thank you for having us.
Excellent. Yeah. Very nice to meet both of you. I think this is a really great time to have you on. We're here in Pittsburgh. What better way to start off honoring our city than to have you on? So thank you for being here. First, we're going to start with a lightning round. So we're going to have a little bit of fun getting to know you a little bit better. So Erin, we'll start with you. What was the first music album that you owned?
Yeah, so I can't quite put a handle on it, but it was either Whitney Houston or U2, Joshua Tree at that time, or Depeche Mode, which shows that I have a really consistent music taste.
Right. I had seen Depeche Mode in concert, and they were fantastic. So I did enjoy that one and would have loved to see U2. So one of those days it's on my list. Mariana, what about you?
Well, I'm originally from Colombia, so the album that I had was, I think it was Shakira, my first one, or Vacilos, which is another band from Colombia.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Yes. Those are, as we think about all of the different musical tastes in the world, it's so cool when I ask this question to hear how different everyone's experience is. So yeah. I appreciate that. Mariana, what is your go-to snack food?
Oh, I love eating and I love talking about food. So it like changes every time. But I think right now I'm in a pistachio era, like pistachio or fruits. Like I will snack on that every single day.
I'm a big pistachio fan. I dig that. I like that. All right, Erin, what about you? What's your go-to snack food?
Yeah, much more lame. For me, it's got to be Cheez-Its. Maybe some Cheez-Its and peanut butter.
Very nice. You know, one of our previous podcasters, the one right before you all, we're doing this back-to-back here in Pittsburgh, also said Cheez-Its. So that's a popular one. All right. Not that you get a lot of time to yourself, Erin, with all your busy work commitments, but what's the last movie or TV show you watched?
Yeah, I was just in Portugal and was able to go to the city where the 100-foot wave exists. You know, if you get to be there for that special time, which I was not. But there's a whole Netflix series called 100-Foot Wave, so I was watching that.
Oh, good research.
Check it out.
For your trip. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Mariana, what about you? Last TV or movie?
As I said, I'm a foodie, so I watch a lot of cooking shows. It kind of like disconnects me from like teaching.
It's very zen, yes.
Yes, so I think MasterChef I usually watch a lot. It just gives me inspiration to what to cook, and yeah, so I think MasterChef.
Is there a particular MasterChef dish that you've tried recently? Do you try and recreate them?
We haven't tried recreate them, but we definitely like get inspiration. We see like fish, and then we're like, oh, we should go and buy that fish. Like for example, like halibut, which is not a very common fish to buy, and then we see how they do it, and we're like, we should go and try to see if they have it at like Whole Foods and buy it.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Good inspiration for dishes. That's great. Okay, and then final lightning round question. So since we're in the Burgh, what is one place you enjoy that you'd recommend others visit while in Pittsburgh? Mariana, why don't you go first?
Yeah, so I've been here for a year, but I think my top two are Frick Park. I love the park. It's super big, and I think it's super nice to go in there, see the deer. But then my second one is the Troy Hill Art Houses. I don't know if you have heard of that one. This one, someone in Heinz told me about it. And it's a house that they have converted into like a art piece, but it's not like a museum or a gallery. Basically, the artist lives there for like a year, and they can do whatever they want with the house. Right now, there's 3 of them. It's the same owner, but he brings different artists. My favorite, I don't want to tell you a lot because I don't want to spoil the experience. Sure. But if you go into the webpage, you can reserve a spot. It's only the weekends. It's for free. And there's 2 that I really like. I really like Dark House, Lighthouse, and La Houte Royale. And if you go, please don't do any research before going. Just sign up and go.
And, and experience it for yourself.
It's a very good experience.
Oh, excellent. I have not heard about that. I love that. Erin, what about you? What would you recommend people visit while they're here?
I have not heard about that, so that's amazing.
Yeah.
I was thinking about it more from the people here for the conference, so a little closer perhaps. So Mount Washington is, people can look up the hill and see Mount Washington and just get a great view of the city. And then also if you are a foodie, you should head to the Strip District and see all of the foods that you can buy there. And if folks have time to get out of town, I think, going to Laurel Highlands, seeing Frank Lloyd Wright houses, so those are, it's an amazing experience not too far from here.
Yes. I've been to a number of those, and those are some of my favorites. And a nice little day trip. So, yeah. Wonderful. Well, thank you both for sharing and letting us get to know you a little bit better. So we'll jump in and start a little bit kind of in the way back. We're going to start kind of where you started with your career and talk a little bit about your origin stories. So, Erin, we'll start with you. How did you find your way into local government and public service, and how did those experiences lead you to your work today as the director?
Yeah, I think I've really always been interested in public service. For folks who are a little bit older, you might remember the yellow, like the phone book, and there's like yellow pages and white pages, but there were also blue pages, and those are like the government section. And I would, I went to undergrad in DC, and I would look at the blue pages for internships. Seriously, I just was really attracted to that part of work, and started my career at the research part of the Justice Department, which was an amazing time and an amazing opportunity, and learned a ton from folks and helped work on projects with local governments, so often with police or U.S. attorneys' offices, but around the country. And it's strange to do that first from the federal government side. And I definitely really, really wanted to try my hand at actually doing the work on the ground. And so, made my way to Pittsburgh through Carnegie Mellon, going to the grad program there at Heinz College, and then really made it a point to try and get to work in local government. So I've been at the Department of Human Services most of my time here.
Sure. And what is it about human services, perhaps for you, versus parks or libraries or public safety? And certainly there's intersectionality amongst all of them, but what is it for you about human services?
Yeah, I mean, if you want the real honest answer, I think I want to be where there's the ability to have the most influence, and that can vary. It does vary from city to city, but in Pittsburgh, we've got the city of Pittsburgh, we have the Allegheny County. The money's on the Allegheny County side. I assumed I would work for the city of Pittsburgh. I think about urban problems generally, but they don't have a lot of the levers you actually need to make reforms. And so the place with the money and the influence is really the Department of Human Services on things that I care about, including criminal legal system reforms, and then all of the other social issues that you would imagine come out of the Department of Human Services.
Yeah, no, and I think that's really good advice for our listeners, particularly those who are kind of looking at if they're starting a career, like where do I go, or if they're working their way through their career and they're like, I really want to make some big impact, is thinking about kind of those things about money and policy and process levers and things like that. I appreciate that you shared that. All right, so Mariana, how did you start your origin story? How did studying statistics and data analysis lead to a career now teaching in that field? And we can talk a little bit about how this led to partnering with the Human Services Agency that Erin leads.
Yeah, sure. So I studied industrial engineer because I've always been very passionate about numbers, but more than about like the math itself is how we can help it. How math can help us understand society or a problem, and how can we use it for the world, basically. I feel there's this conception of like math are only equations, but I really like to see that it's a tool that we can apply to any context. And I feel that's industrial engineering. It's just a set of tools that then you can like go and put into any context. But it was really when I came to the US to my PhD, my advisor at Northwestern, Karen Smilowitz, she works on the nonprofit setting, and that's where I started doing more projects like on the nonprofit side, and I see how interesting they are, and I really got engaged into like working for nonprofit rather than like for profit, just because the type of questions that you ask, the way you look into the data, the statistics, they tell you different stories. So after that, now I'm working mostly in the nonprofit, very interested about like different questions that you can ask. And then the teaching part, I've always been very, very passionate about teaching. Since like early in my undergrad, I was like TAing, grading, doing all this stuff. And I ended up doing a PhD, not because I wanted to do research, but because I wanted to do teaching. And someone told me like, oh, you need to do a PhD. And I was like, okay, I'll do a PhD. So that's what I ended up in doing teaching. And I really want to show the students that math is not numbers, that it's really a tool. And Heinz gave me that opportunity of teaching public policy students, and I teach very data-oriented and stats-heavy classes. So I have a data class called Data Analytics for Decision Making, where we focus on what is the story that the data is telling us, and how can we create actions from the data, like understanding the problem setting. And for example, for the stats class, which is a core class that not a lot of students love, because it's not the class why they come to Heinz. I try to see it more from a why perspective. Why are we teaching stats, and how we can use this in your future life? And then like for the last part, partnering with DHS, it actually happened through the capstone projects. We have capstone projects at Heinz, which is basically the students in their last year, they do an applied project. They're paired up with an organization, and they have to like solve a problem. There's like a big question, and they have to tackle the project and give a solution.
Yeah. Well, when I was at Heinz for my graduate degree, I often joke with my teams, like, I was told there would be no math today, right? And taking the stats class, you walk into that thinking, oh God, this is going to be so difficult, particularly for me who finds this stuff hard. But I love the concept, and we did this in our class to some degree around what do you do with the numbers? Like, how does it help you be data informed? How does it help you solve problems? And I think that's a really unique aspect of what is taught at Heinz versus what might be taught somewhere else. And Carnegie Mellon has kind of thought through what that means for the students and when they come out of the program, where they get to go, whether they're leading agencies like DHS or working in other aspects of public or private sector. I think that's been really a kind of a unique angle for that. So thank you for being a part of that. For students like me.
They come like super scared to the class at first. Like you can say the first day of class, everyone has their eyes open and they're super scared. But then like at the end, this is my second year teaching, but I already have students who took the class last year and they're like, oh, I actually did this in my internship that we did in class, and I like connect the two things, and I'm like, I'm so glad that like now you can use the data and like you understand what you're doing. So
yeah,
it makes me very happy.
That's awesome. Well, let's talk a little bit about when you first picked up on using data to inform your team's work, and kind of what difference that made in outcomes. We're going to talk to Erin a little bit about that. But Mariana, when you studied statistics and these sorts of things, and you connected to DHS, what are some of those projects that you're working on just in general with the agency?
So right now, so far I have only done the jail one, the Allegheny County Jail with DHS, where we were trying to look at programs that were provided by DHS to the Allegheny County Jail.
That's great.
To the people there. I don't know if you want to talk about
Well,
it.
yeah, we'll talk about that in a second.
Yes.
But I think that's the piece here that we're weaving through, because we're going to talk about, where you take the data and statistics and apply it to that real world problem. Yeah. So Erin, where did you first pick up on using data to inform your team's work? And from your perspective, what difference has this made in the outcomes and impacts for the communities that you serve?
Yeah, thanks. I'd love to talk a little bit about how we use data. And I think I come to it, I don't know, like from birth or something. And the career that I talked about kind of led in that direction anyway. So, being at the research part of the Justice Department is helpful in terms of science advancing that field. And choosing to go to Carnegie Mellon is a choice towards, for at least for some of us, towards the analytic bent.
Yeah.
I hope there will be math today.
Right.
As opposed to maybe I hope there's no math today. So I went for that set of skills that we could use, and then ran analytics, right, at the Department of Human Services. But I also had a boss who wanted analytics and statistics and information to drive policy. And so it does start with, I think, leadership wanting that information and investing in it. So it is unusual that an agency like the Department of Human Services would have such an investment in IT and analytic infrastructure, but not just that, the staff to actually run that work. So I don't know, we have 40 or 50 analysts at the department, and we do analytic work across many different domains, including outside of our agency. So we do work in child welfare and homelessness and criminal justice systems, but we also do work with the schools and other partners, and are kind of the focal entity for analytics for all of local government. And truthfully, I can't imagine, doing work without it. So, if you go to Allegheny Analytics, the website, you'll see lots of different dashboards and reports, and allows us to look at our practice. But there are also tools there for everyone to use. So good tools for students, tools for people to understand problems. And I think also really important is we provide data back to individuals. So government's always going to have data on its citizens, if you will, or people that we're serving. We take the time and effort to integrate it well and use it for policy and management, but we also use it for care, to integrate care at the person level and improve that care. And again, importantly, I think, return it back to people. And so there's also an application where people can log on and see their own sort of integrated government records, which includes healthcare, so as long as public insurance is paying for it, so Medicare, actually not Medicare, Medicaid, but also if they've had a jail booking, if they have court cases, if they're involved in the child welfare system, if they've used our shelter system. And so I think it's just important that we return that back to the people we serve.
Yeah. Looking at this website, it's incredible. So that's one of the cool things that I get to do when I'm looking at who do I want to have on the podcast, who would be interesting. We have some great things in Long Beach, and we do some data, some open data and some portal. This is incredible. It is, that integration is notable. I don't think I've ever seen anything like it. And then also this concept that you build that into sort of operations and management. And maybe you can talk a little bit more, like what is an example of that, how you take that and make decisions.
Yeah. So I'll give you an example of some of the work that we do that's kind of further reaching. So let's take child welfare. We get 14,000 calls to the hotline every year of alleged abuse and neglect. A full third of children in this country will have a child welfare investigation before they turn 18.
Oh, wow.
And so there's just tremendous volume, and you actually don't have a lot of information at that stage. The caller or reporter will not have a ton of details. And so we use our workforce kind of intuition and experience and couple that with a predictive risk model that predicts the likelihood of a child with safety issues so significant that a judge orders removal within 2 years, right? So really serious safety issues, we can predict that. And couple that with experience and make, I think, far safer decisions and far more fair decisions. So, these are the kind of tools that people are concerned about because there's bias in the data, and there is bias in the data. However, we can show that we've reduced racial disparities in that system by over half, right? And we're seeing replications of that in other jurisdictions. We do this work with tremendous care because we know how serious it is. So, we started this work in 2014. That was a long time ago in this world. We did ethical assessments even back then. We asked for independent ethical assessments. We had Stanford do evaluation and so on. So we take this work because we know it's groundbreaking with a lot of care. And it just does help so much. We found that we were leaving a lot of kids in risky situations, but we were also using a lot of workforce to investigate cases where there was a very low likelihood of removal, very unlikely that there would be safety issues. Those are much more likely to be kids of color and families of color, and so we don't have to investigate those cases. So we do that with homelessness as well, deciding what how to parse really scarce resources, which is a horrible job, really, because everyone needs housing. But if we have to parse, how do we parse for the most vulnerable?
Yeah, the website was just mind blowing when I saw it. So good work for you and your teams, and I love the concept of paving the way for adjacent or other agencies doing similar things, which is pretty neat. As you're talking about some of these populations, so those experiencing homelessness, children, what are some of the biggest challenges facing the vulnerable populations that you work with here in the county? And how does using this data help your staff at Allegheny County respond?
Yeah, I'll give an example where we certainly have in no way solved the problem, but I think information always helps. And I think the other thing to note is that it's there. So we provide we work with students, and you'll hear more about that, but we'll provide data to researchers to do groundbreaking work, because we have this kind of integrated data that most people don't have. So we don't have to have all the solutions if we're willing to provide the data, and others can help us to move along that way. But like something like homelessness, which is a really significant increasing issue here, we do kind of weird things like, I have analysts, not social workers. We have social workers who have, very different jobs when it comes to this population. But take a bike ride along the impacted routes in Allegheny County and count tents and encampments every single week. So I know every single week over week, how many tents there are, where the encampments are. they're not focused on the people. We have street outreach focused on the people, really,
Sure.
you know, so that's a different whole role. But having analysts even just to give us that information, additionally, like trying to really understand the origins of homelessness and how they're changing. And we do see, you know, two different kind of issues at play. California, you know this for a long time, but we finally are getting, people really are priced out of rent here. And so we see a new population of people who are, who just can't make the next rental payment. They don't have serious and persistent mental illness or substance use disorder.
Sure.
They really just got, you know, again, which is unique for a place like Pittsburgh, but not unique to the rest of the country. So trying to understand the two different populations and what are the interventions that can work for each has really helped us to create new initiatives. County executive launched just a couple of months ago. Actually, we just passed our 100 days of 500 and 500. That's bringing on 500 units in the next now 400 days to people experiencing homelessness, so we can get flow in our shelter system.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like that using that data, you're first of all be able to tell the difference between populations, and therefore then really focus on the prevention aspect, or you mentioned intervention aspect, of what would be appropriate for a particular population. Imagine you're in a circumstance where you don't have this data or it's not as robust. You might be in a position, your agency might be in a position to provide the same thing to everybody, which is, we know is not what you do from an equity lens standpoint, and is, can be more harmful, even if that was not the intended consequence for those who find themselves in a situation being homeless.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So one of the ways in which you partner with people, as you mentioned here in this example where you provide information kind of out in the world, is the opportunity to work with local universities like Carnegie Mellon and the students there who, again, we just heard from a couple students in a previous podcast around, they bring the passion, they bring the interest, they are here for public service work because they want to leave something better than they found it. They want to make a difference. And I've learned recently about a particular partnership between DHS and Carnegie Mellon's Heinz School around a project that Mariana, you advised, related to Allegheny County jails. So let's talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, sure.
What is this project? What is the role of CMU, students and faculty? How are you partnering with the staff at DHS? And kind of what did you learn and what was the impact of this work?
Sure. So I'll first try to describe the big, what was the project, and then how the interactions with between people happened. So the project basically was between DHS provides services or programs in the Allegheny County Jail. But of course, there's different constraints, right? We have physical space, there's funding constraints, there's program capacities, there's, depending on the length of stay of people in jail, you can provide or not provide a service. So the main question they brought to us, or to the students, I should say, was they wanted to know the number of individuals at a given time whom they can offer a program, and who should they prioritize out of the individuals that they suggested. So with this very unstructured project, because when you get this, you're like, okay, where do I start?
You can go in a million different directions,
yes.
Right? Yeah.
So the students get this, and there are constant meetings we had a contact at DHS who will meet with the students and with me weekly. So there was this part of we are collaborating with them. So it's not like we're giving you a model and that's it, but it's actually how can we create a set of tools that can help you with the decision-making process. So for me, the goal is not give me the optimal solution, this is the number of programs, but we need to give them a tool that they can modify in the future and that they understand how they work that can help them with the decision-making process. So the students, great group of students, they focus in two main things. Again, you cannot focus on all the things at the same time. Right. One, they create a prediction model to determine if the people at jail were going to stay at jail for a certain duration. So one example was 7 weeks, because that's the usual duration of the programs. So rather than knowing the exact number of days they're staying there, you really are interested in, are they going to be there long enough for the
Sure.
program. And once you know that, then you can incorporate that information into an optimization model to actually try to decide what is the best allocation of your resources, knowing the number of people that you have, and then you know who you should prioritize according to certain constraints in the optimization model. So they provided these two tools for DHS. They did an amazing presentation. They provided, of course, like the code and all that. But what I really like about this project is how it was this constant interaction with DHS and with the students. So it was like weekly interactions where we get to like know more like, oh, are we going this direction? Is that something that you want? And there was a lot of moments that students will think like ABC. And then DHS was like, oh, we actually didn't think about that. And it was a great direction, right? Mm-hmm. Or there were cases that students would say like ABC, and there was like, actually we're getting like out of the scope of the project because we cannot give you the data, or funding, we cannot do anything about funding. So there's certain constraints. So it's very interesting to see the process of the students once they get an unstructured problem, which is very different to a class example.
Well, it sounds very iterative too, right?
Yes.
So, and I when I was hearing about this, I was curious about, so are you giving them like policy recommendations? But what I hear you say is that it's the optimization model that leads to a particular outcome that they can use them for decision making, mm-hmm. which is a lot more long lasting, I think, over time as we're thinking about, you know, how you use data. So that's a really unique angle for us, for a university to be in that spot to provide that service, and then also for students who get to kind of use that as their learning for, you know, a future career and things like that.
Yeah, I used to tell students, like, you are experts in data, right? But you are not necessarily experts in the context of the project that you are assigned to, and that's why this iterative process is so important, and that at the end you cannot tell them this is what you should do, but actually these are the metrics I found, here's what you are doing, here's what you could achieve with the model you have. But of course, because it's an iterative process, you can be like, actually something changes, or like everyday things change, and then you can like incorporate that in the models. So it's more a conversation rather than like, here's your solution. Mm-hmm. And that's how I tell students, like, they should think about it. And that's why I think it's so important that they learn to scope the project and like know like which metrics and how are we evaluating the projects. Mm-hmm. That's like super valuable for this in these capstone projects in general.
Yeah. And so with this particular project with the Allegheny County jails and the partnership with DHS, what were some of the things that came out of that? So you have, outside of the model, what were some of what did the optimization process lead to? What did it share with DHS?
Yeah, so the optimization process, they did kind of like a smaller example because, again, they didn't have like the whole data. Mm-hmm. But it led to a solution that was like you could allocate the people in jail in more programs that they were doing before, because they basically took into account the room capacities, the type of people in jail. But more than like telling them this is the optimal distribution, again, it was more about like the metrics. Like, here is where you're now. And if we do a sensitivity analysis, meaning if we change this parameter, if you make this change, this is the impact that it will have in your overall metric. And some of the metrics they were considering is how many people ended up in the programs, what type of people. So they did a good analysis of, again, talking about like biases, right? This is a very, in every problem, but in this one in particular, it's very important to be aware of biases, and mm-hmm. your model can have biases. So if you talk about metrics that incorporate biases and you look at what population you're serving, which population are you assigning to the projects, then you can have a conversation around, do we like this solution or we don't like this solution, mm-hmm. and why? And how can we change or add more constraints into the model or change our objective in order to make it better for everyone.
Sure. Yeah. And Erin, just to kind of pull on this thread here, is the folks who are in jail and are participating in these programs, I'm assuming there's some level of outcomes you're looking for, whether it's percent of recidivism or repeat stays in jail and things like that. What was, from your perspective, this kind of approach useful for solving?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, a couple of things to note. First, I think that an important thing about the Department of Human Services at this point is that, and I know enough about this project to talk about it, but I'm not a part of it at all, right? And we have such a deep bench, such a strong group of analysts and staff that you could pull from a hat who could manage that project and do, I think, a good job with the team. So I think that's important. And yes, typically we're going to try and optimize on reducing recidivism, and hopefully not so much anymore, but back in the day and still today, most people are not going to come back to the jail, right? And so, and you can, by incorporating those two groups together, low and high risk, do harm, as we've said. The interesting thing about this to me is, at least as I understand it, is a problem is that the sentencing behavior of the judges has changed. And so it used to be about, let's call it 20% of people in the Allegheny County Jail were sentenced. And so they're sentenced to a certain amount of time.
Stay, right.
And then we know how long they're going to be there, and then we can decide what services and supports. Well, that's dropped by about half. And so we're talking over 90% of the jail are people that are detained, and pretrial. And so we have no idea when they're going to leave, which means we have fewer opportunities to know how long our services can and should be in place in order to, get the full dosage of the program and so on. So I think a length of stay model and trying to understand who's going to be there long enough to benefit from the program is something we actually, not is something we actually need, but it sounds like we gave the students a good problem, because that's a problem, like a newer problem for us, and it sounds like they provided insight. And we are also the kind of people who, when given code, even if we don't take the code exactly directly, we can implement the thinking of the students on our side and run that in perpetuity, right? So take that understanding. I mean, the other thing, I'll just be honest, I wasn't there for that presentation, but I mean, I think about it as shopping for students to hire.
Yeah.
Right?
Oh, yeah.
So, one of the students from that project is now working in DHS.
Yeah.
He ended up there. And when we do the coding thing, they did a meeting with all of the people involved of the project, and then they were like, here's the coding, and they went step to step. But I think what really add value to this project is that the student end up going there. So now he's there, maybe working on the same project. I don't know.
Exactly. And so, I mean, we wouldn't also be as good as we are at analytics if we didn't have schools like the Heinz College and University of Pittsburgh right down the street who can help to supply, if you will, such great, evolving analysts. What I learned, what you learned at Heinz is not the same as being taught today, and that's important because then we can also continue to improve.
Yeah. Well, I think the interesting part about having students, and I have a lot of students in my work, very different than DHS, but nonetheless, is it's energizing. You see that spark of that of the student, something that resonates with me that I had at some point in life, and try to keep that flame going, right? And they teach you the new things that are out there in the world that we don't have the opportunities to know because we're in a particular level of our organization. And then also kind of the whatever the modern mindset is, right? We don't do that way anymore, or we think about it this way, or here's the new language around equity, or whatever the topic is, right? And so you get to kind of get that jolt of energy and learning in a different way from those who work with us on those projects, which is pretty neat. Let's keep that flow going here. What have you learned, Erin, and what value have you gained in university and agency partnership over the years?
Yeah, I think we've touched on this. So certainly the students who we've been able to hire, that's an important piece. The kind of student projects that both give us students to hire, as well as the spark that you talked about and some code along the way. And then we also have very long-term partnerships with, some collaborators who have, who know our data as well as we do, and can help on the long run. I mentioned the kind of predictive risk models we started building about a decade ago. We're still partnering with that team. We have other partners, including at Heinz, building other, helping us to build other work. But there are just things, especially when they're new, that we can't do on our own. And while a lot of evaluation we can do on our own, it is also important to have independent evaluation to validate the work that we're doing. So really long-term research partnerships, but also, collaborations. And you all know this, it's not always easy. It's easy enough on a student project. It's not always easy to find things that fit with, cutting-edge, publishable research and our day-to-day problems. So that's always it's a challenge. Like those are always going to be challenges in those kinds of relationships, but we have relationships kind of at multiple levels that both support our work, but also support academics to further knowledge in these areas.
Yeah. And then Mariana, what have you learned and what value do you think has been gained for Carnegie Mellon and the Heinz School in this university and agency partnership?
Yeah, I think starting from a student perspective, I think it's a really great opportunity for students to work on real world problems. I feel like when they come to school, right, and they are in a data class, they are giving a data set that is perfectly clean and follows certain patterns. But I think when they are exposed to these real world problems, having the opportunity of just engaging in the project, interacting with other people outside of Heinz, I think is super important from the students. I think it's a win-and-win situation because they might see patterns that maybe the organization haven't seen, and then they're like, oh, this is a great thing, right? We didn't see this question. I actually, not in Heinz, I hope to build the same class in Heinz, but in Northwestern I used to TA for a class that we will work with Evanston and the school district, and they will come to the class and we will students will analyze the data and then they will present to the school district. And there was a lot of questions that they didn't thought about. I'm trying to build that now at a local level in Pittsburgh with my data analytics class. But I think it's really important to see the impact of the world. And also as an academic, sometimes we think oh, it has to be publishable, right? But I feel for me, it's just, I really enjoy working on problems that are outside of academia. I teach stats, so there's not a lot that I can do in the introductory stats class, but I try to do it in the data analytics class because I'm really curious of how can we help society. So small projects in class or bigger projects just for my personal interest.
Very good, very good. I have one question to go back to for you, Erin. You talked a little bit about this kind of entourage of analysts, right, and how unique that was. Where did that concept come from? In terms of that was a good way to think about kind of how you or previous administrations organize the agency to be really supportive of data.
Yeah, I think it built up over time, honestly. Yeah. I'm clearly biased towards this kind of a perspective in government.
Sure.
But I really do find that in the work that most people are doing in government, making funding decisions with, large scale planning, that these are the skills you actually need to run these programs. And honestly, the sooner we actually acknowledge that and get folks into those positions, I think the better off we are. So we started by building around, core issues like a child welfare analytics team. But I do find that those analysts can really help drive the whole organization forward, and that, again, most of the skills that are needed to actually run that are taught in schools like Heinz College. So I think those approaches just add so much value along the way that those investments become, the critical investments to make. But I do think it's unique in that if you there's probably a tipping point and before that tipping point, they're actually not all that helpful because the data's not right, their analysis therefore isn't correct, they don't understand the actual problem well enough to help, and they have no clue how to implement, right? So all of those things can happen, but at a certain tipping point where those things flip, I think it just shows itself every day in being able to drive forward the work. And I guess I would argue for investments up to some kind of tipping point where it sort of changes everything.
Yeah. Well, and kind of keeping that investment alive over a long term, like stay the course, right?
Yeah.
Like it's really easy for governments to invest in something, particularly something that is new or shiny. I talk about shiny objects all the time, right? And then, it's not working, and so we're going to do something else. But they're with data, you can probably demonstrate the value even when it starts as a fledgling organization operation, that over time in demonstrating that it's making improvements and it actually can help is part of that important piece, communication.
Yeah, I mean, think about, I don't know the budget of Long Beach, but if you took 1% of that and invested it in analysts, as opposed to IT. I mean, people put all kinds of money in IT that doesn't actually help drive the business, but I mean, you need it. But
sure.
If you think about 1% of budget, you would have
1% of $3 billion.
Yeah, I think you would have a pretty good org. And why not, right?
Yeah.
Like, what other org of $3 billion would not invest 1% in analytics?
Yeah.
I mean, you have to think about the trade-offs there, and so I think that's an easy. It's an easy thing to defend, but people will also say, every dollar taken away from social service provision is a dollar misspent. Someone might say that.
Sure.
However, obviously, if you're spending those dollars in much sort of more effective ways using the kind of research we've talked about and evidence, I think easily justify that.
Yeah, very good.
But I will say one other thing, like it's scary from an analyst perspective. I remember, coming from the federal government where you could kind of say whatever you wanted. You never actually had to see the outcome because, it's so far from you. When my boss, who led the organization for a long time, was going to use what I had produced, I was like terrified. I was like, wait, like with those people that I can actually see and like those outcomes in my community, and I went back and checked. So you have to like. It's important, and it actually will change practice. And so that's the best work around is actually changing practice, but it's got to be good enough where you feel confident enough in it.
But I love when projects at the end you actually end up seeing the results. Like I hate when you do a project and then like it just like stays in the paper and you're like, well, yeah, I found all these cool things, but like if it actually doesn't like go this step forward of you're seeing what, even if it's never perfect, of course, and that's why it's kind of this iterative process of we provide tools and we provide metrics rather than just like this is it. But it's so cool to see when you're like, I help in that. I think that's super nice.
Yeah, well, and that concept of moving the needle is a very tangible thing for, say, a student, where they're like, I helped with that. I have an example of that for our capstone project at Carnegie Mellon Heinz School as well, that about diversity on boards and commissions, and there's been a lot of work here locally that I've continued to follow because it was important to me, even though I didn't live here anymore. But thinking about, I helped with that, and on the darkest days of one's career, or the most frustrating interactions you might have with a member of the public, that those baby steps are important, and also continues to show students that there's a career path here, right? Like you started, whether they stay in Pittsburgh or not, they started something that they can then continue and follow along and really kind of delve their passions into, and there are valuable and viable careers in public service and in local government in these spaces around data analytics, which I think is helpful. Yeah. Well, shout out to the data analytics team at DHS. I think this is super interesting for me to think about, in the construct of my organization, and I hope other listeners are doing the same. So as we wrap up today, Let's talk about what's next for each of you. What are some special or interesting things that you're working on that our listeners should look out for? And Mariana, we'll start with you.
Sure. So as a teaching faculty, I'm always thinking about what other course am I teaching next. I think for me, short term, continue building my data analytics courses. I would love to have more interactions with organizations and community. Just because, again, I've only been teaching for a year, so I'm kind of like in this process of figuring out Pittsburgh and like who should I contact. I love doing this, like projects where like students can actually see an impact. So that's kind of like short term, how can I structure this course better? Long term, I'm always looking to work with other organizations more from like a personal research or just I love looking at different problems and contexts and how I can use the tools and the industrial engineering part in me in solving and helping people. So
that's great. That's great. And then Erin, what about you? What are some things our listeners should look out for?
Yeah, we're working on a number of different things. I'm excited to watch. We did a large randomized control trial about a year ago, assigning people to one of three groups around public transit. And so for us, that's really about another way of essentially putting money in people's pockets. A lot of the needs we have in our community are really needs of money. And we, $3 billion or not, we don't have $3 billion, but there's not enough money on the ground to actually solve the issues of poverty. So how can we kind of, from a cost-effective way, see how money can help? So we have, from those results of that study, we've got a half-fare program in place. I'm really actually interested in the various constraints between my agency and the regional transit agency and seeing if we can't get to full fare, a full fare, free full fare for SNAP eligible, so for low-income people. I think that's it's an interesting problem. Truly, what are the constraints? Nobody should get ripped off, if you will, in this process. How do we find, is there middle ground? And if so, how do we make those lines connect on the chart? And of course, all at for the people, because of course the full fare program certainly was more effective than the half-fare program. So we know that. How can we get there?
Well, and transit here is so key because of the topography, the three rivers, the bridges. For anyone who's not
hills.
Right, the hills. For anyone who has not been to Pittsburgh, it is a hard place to traverse if you're not taking public transit. And even like walking and biking and scootering, reeling can be difficult. So
for sure. Super interesting problem, I think, and we're testing other ways of combining services and money in various combinations to see what kind of results we get. With the eye of, obviously all the time of improving outcomes. We're also going to be issuing a solicitation and. We'll see how this comes out, really looking at probably teams to move stuck problems. So we can have all the data we want. That doesn't mean we know what to do. So take something like medication-assisted treatment for opioid use disorder. We know it's effective, but we're stuck at a percent of people that are taking up and keeping with it, and we can't seem to nudge it beyond that. And I do believe in breakthroughs in these things if we get the right team of people, which could be local practitioners, researchers, good thinkers in that space, coupled with whatever data they want and resources to test. How can we kind of break through that problem? There's 4 or 5 problems like that, and just take a shot at really advancing the field in a couple of key areas.
I can't wait to see that solicitation. I can't wait to see that. I will be closely watching that. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, we have had such a great time with both of you today here on the GovLove podcast. We're going to end with, if you could be the GovLove DJ, what song would each of you pick for the exit music? Mariana, we can start with you.
Yesterday I was listening to September by Earth, Wind and Fire, and it says like September 21st, and I was like, oh, we're out by 1 day.
Oh, that's right.
So then I was like, maybe that one.
Yeah, that's a good one. And we won't pay attention to the date. It's fine. We can still use it.
It's still September.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, I heard that a lot of people are getting married on that day because of that song. now.
Oh,
like
wow.
it's become a thing. Which
You
is-
know, there's lots of things out there, and
Why
that's
not?
probably one of the better ones, right?
That's right, for sure. Hopefully not overdone, but I was thinking they blinded me with science.
Oh, I love that so much. That's a great one. Awesome. Well, thank you very much for both of you for spending some time with me today. I really appreciate it, and we hope that our listeners get a lot out of the guidance and advice you provided. So thank you.
Thank you for inviting
Yeah,
us.
thank you.
That ends our GovLove episode for today. A big thanks to Erin and Mariana for joining the podcast. Subscribe to GovLove on your favorite podcast app. New episodes drop every Friday. If you are already subscribed to GovLove, go tell a friend or colleague about this podcast or share on social media. Help us spread the word that GovLove is a go-to place for local government stories. GovLove is brought to you by ELGL, Engaging Local Government Leaders. The best way to support GovLove is to become an ELGL member. You can reach us online at elgl.org/govlove or at GovLove Podcast on LinkedIn, Instagram, and X. Thanks for listening. This has been GovLove, a podcast about local government.